Welcome to the Choosing to Stay podcast. We're your hosts, Hali and Stephanie Hamby, Certified Relationship and Recovery Coaches, and we specialize in supporting couples who are healing from infidelity and betrayal. We invite you to join us each week as we explore the challenges and joys of the recovery journey for couples who are choosing to stay in a relationship after betrayal. We'll encourage you with hope for healing and transformation. Connection, empathy, growth. Choosing to stay.
Thank you for joining us on the Choosing to Stay podcast. Hallie and I are going to discuss the stages of the ERCEM healing and what that looks like moving forward as a couple in recovery and through all the stages. So we're going to talk on each topic briefly. Each stage has their own pieces that every couple goes through and the longevity and they progress through those, but they're typically common for most couples. And so we just want to talk about those today.
Yeah, and before we jump into that, I want to just, if you remember from last week, our first episode, ERCEM is an acronym that stands for Early Recovery Couples Empathy Model. And I think the thing that pulls Stephanie and I together in our thoughts is our passion behind this model of healing for couples, because a lot of times it is the belief that the relational healing can't happen until each of the individuals have pretty much fully healed or done a lot of healing work. And while I think there is some truth to some of that, I think we've been missing a piece. And that's what I love about Carol Jurgensen Sheets' model for early recovery in couples work, is because we're jumping into the relational work from the beginning, from shortly after the discovery of the betrayal or whatever the sexual integrity issue has been for the couple. And so we jump into that right at the beginning. Now, does that mean that there doesn't need to be individual work that happens? No, I think there is definitely still a need for the individual healing to take place. But we all know that if you're still together, and even if you're not, there's relational work that needs to be done even from the beginning. And we can't wait until both partners have fully healed before we start that relational work. And so that's what I love about this ERCEM model, is that we're working with the couple from the beginning and not waiting farther down the healing road before we jump into that work.
Yeah, I agree. And so the ERCEM model is specifically is for early recovery. And I love that you mentioned that, Hallie, that the couple can come together just shortly after that discovery and they begin working on him containing her pain and him providing this space for her to be able to heal, but them to both be able to heal together. And I love that it is early recovery. So you can begin working through this pain and through the trauma and the heartbreak of this discovery together.
Mhm.
And I always believe that two are better than one. So if you both have intentions on or a willingness to move towards reconciliation, that it is best in this model.
So the first phase is acknowledging the need for safety, truth through acts of empathy. The second phase is working through the anger, grief, and loss of sexual betrayal. And the third phase is choosing post traumatic growth. So let's jump into a few of the things that come up in the first phase of acknowledging the need for safety and truth and developing empathy skills. So let's talk about some of the prerequisites that need to be in place in order for the couple to start healing. And the first one is just the acknowledgement from the person that has done the betraying of the pain that they have caused to the partner. I think that is a foundational piece. I think that's a foundational piece for the partner who has been betrayed to see that the person who's caused the pain is acknowledging that they have caused that pain.
And it's also really important that as the partner chooses, yes, to engage in the reconciliation of this marriage or work on the process of healing, that there's a willingness of and from both partners. So having that willingness is just being able to sit in the moment and be able to process what has happened and to be able to move forward in your healing together. I like to use the term as you're committing to the process. And so you have a willingness to commit to the process. And so I do believe that is a prerequisite to the couples coming together in early recovery.
Yeah. I think part of that too, that committing to the process is for the person that has the sexual integrity issues to pretty much be willing to do whatever they need to do. The partner needs to see that they're willing to fight for the relationship. And the first piece of that is to change the behaviors that were causing the pain in the first place. And so, depending on what those behaviors are, if there's an addiction present, that might include getting some addiction recovery support, might be finding a therapist who is a CSAT. If you don't know what CSAT is, it stands for Certified Sexual Addiction Therapist. So, seeing someone that is specialized in that training, it might mean joining a group. If there's been infidelity, that might mean getting some individual support to kind of dig into what led you to make those choices that we can presume are outside of your value system. So, having an understanding of what led you to make the choices that you did that caused the pain in the relationship is a really important piece for the betrayed partner to see from the person who's caused the pain.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that it's very important to seek out help and with specialists who are trained in this field and who are very familiar with infidelity and betrayal, who know how to guide you along that path of these stages, but also recognize the nuances and what is lying behind the sexual integrity issues themselves.
Yeah, I think that piece of finding the correct support is so important that we highlight that because I don't know how many clients that I have met with that have seen a therapist or a coach who doesn't understand betrayal. And it can actually be more damaging than good if they don't fully understand all of the things, the complicated issues that are associated with betrayal trauma. I always say that betrayal trauma is kind of a beast of its own, and there's so many little tentacles to it that if you don't understand it, even the most well meaning professional or ecclesiastical leader or family member or friend can give some really painful advice that actually can be more damaging than good. So I love that you brought up that piece of finding the right support. And if you don't know where to begin, find somebody that has the APSATS training, the ERCEM training, or is a CSAT, or that has specialized training in betrayal trauma. And APSATS is the gold standard for betrayal trauma for training for professionals, coaches, and therapists to be sensitive to the partner needs when there's been infidelity and betrayal in the relationship. So, as you seek out support, please make sure that you're looking for a professional with that specific training.
I do know too, and what I see a lot with my clients is taking that first step into getting help. And a lot of times, whenever they see the problem within their relationship, and yes, they know that they both need help and support, and they have even searched out the best caregivers and support system that they could find. It's taking that initial step into recovery that can feel kind of daunting for them. The 3 stages, it gives hope of what to look forward to in your recovery and going through the phases, and that there is something good on the other side, or there could potentially be something good on the other side of doing this hard work.
Yeah, that's what I think that is drawing both you and I to this ERCEM recovery model. Is it's not so much a structure because every couple and individual's journey is going to be individualized. But there are tools along the way and there's phases, and so you kind of have a vision of where we're going. And when you first start out, that can be so daunting to go, I don't even know where to start or what to do. And so finding the correct support, I think is so critical, but that's what I love about what we do is that we do have sort of a path for them to follow, even though it will be individualized for each couple.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things, which is like people, we want a roadmap. We want to know where we're heading. We want to know what we're doing here. And although every couple heals differently and every individual heals differently, there is these specific phases that they all tend to go through. And so it's good, it's hopeful and encouraging to know that there is, yes, that pathway ahead.
Yeah. So some of the pieces of what that support might look like, I just want to throw out a couple of ideas is that it could be individual coaching or therapy from a trained specialist. It could be groups. If there's an addiction present, it could be an addiction recovery group. One thing that you said that I'd love to have you expand on a little bit more, Stephanie, is you used the phrase kind of rebuilding ourselves through connecting to God, self, and others. And I just love that. Do you want to speak a little bit more to that?
When you start seeking support of other people who can validate what you are experiencing, you first know that you're not alone in it. You're not alone in this journey, but you're also what you're experiencing normal and it's common and you're not crazy for feeling the way that you do. So support is huge. A motto that I use, and I think that is huge in healing from sexual integrity issues, but also from partner betrayal, is connecting to God, ourselves, and others. And it's through that connection of learning about ourselves and how we respond to situations in life and respond to events and experiences. Those are the things that typically cause the sexual integrity issues. And so it's understanding and being able to connect to ourselves, but it's also the connecting to others piece and having that support of safe people around you that are going to support your decisions and support your hard work in this recovery journey. And
Mhm.
that looks like your therapeutic support, your coaches, your counselors, but also the safe community around you that can just hold you up and pray for you and support you in your time. So support and connecting to others is huge. And then connecting to God.
Yeah, and it's bringing you out of isolation, which isolation is like we have to bring it up into the light and pull ourselves out of that isolation, which is really opens up the door for healing and growth. And this is a whole episode of itself, another time down the road. Another prerequisite for couples healing is truth. If you don't know the truth, you don't actually know what you're healing from. You don't know what you're choosing to stay with. And so, even though sometimes for the partner with the sexual integrity issues, this truth piece can feel really daunting or really scary, it is so critical to laying the foundation for what can be and develop into a totally new type of relationship. And I think that that is an important piece too, is that we're not going back to the way things were. We're actually creating something new. We're creating a different type of relationship, and that needs to be based on a foundation of truth. And so, for the partner who has been betrayed to have the full truth of what the behaviors actually have been is very critical. And so, sometimes having a formal disclosure that is supported by coaches or therapists who are trained in disclosures can be a really important healing step. Is it for every couple? No, but it can be really beneficial. And this is something that the partner gets to decide if they want to make that request for a a formal disclosure. And I have worked with people where they have had a formal disclosure and I've seen the power that it can have in their relationship. And I've worked with couples who didn't feel like they needed that formal disclosure. So I think that's also an individual decision that you can make as you consult with your coach or your therapist along the way.
I agree. The disclosure, I think, is a whole nother topic itself. But
Good.
the laying the truth foundation, we use this analogy of the the whole house is shattered and the foundation has shattered. And so you have to rebuild a house and the foundation of it is truth. For the one with sexual integrity issues, being able to tell the truth and get the truth out, it usually comes with a sense of relief. It's just helping to build that shame resiliency that we are working through in these stages. Truth is has to be the foundation of working together and rebuilding that. I love how you said that, Hallie, about the newness. You're rebuilding a new relationship through this. And truth is the foundation of that piece.
So we talk about that as a prerequisite for healing, and I think that word prerequisite is so spot on because I think this is the piece that will keep a couple stuck for a long time. If the partner with the sexual integrity issue says, "It's in the past, I don't wanna bring it up. Let's not talk about it. Let's just put it in the past and move on." That can be a really big stumbling block for the partner who has been betrayed to actually heal.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so if you feel some resistance around that, I totally get it. I totally get that there might be some resistance. I think a common misconception of that is that what he or she doesn't know won't hurt her. And I think that that does such a disservice for the healing of the couple because the truth is actually that the betrayed partner would actually prefer to have all of the ugly truths rather than a lie wrapped in rainbows and butterflies.
Yes.
And so, even though that can feel daunting, if you get the support from someone who can walk you through that, it can be, like you said, relieving for the sexual integrity issues to feel like they are truly seen, which is the foundation for intimacy, right? If you break the word intimacy down, into me, see, you're able to see into them fully. And then there's something powerful that comes from a partner having all of the truth and choosing to stay even with the truth. And so I think that truth piece is so important and it can be a big stumbling block for healing, which is why it's under the list of prerequisites for healing.
Yeah, it's absolutely like in the beginning, the truth that we're starting on the truth. But you said something about it being really important for the partner. And scientifically in the brain and what's going on inside of the brain to make sense of her story and what has happened to her life, those truth facts and lining up the timeline of events, it really helps her brain heal from the trauma to have that truth put into the timeline so she can know her story. And so, yeah, that's another topic for a whole nother day. But truth is huge, and you are rebuilding the relationship on truth.
Yeah. Okay. My brain is going to a whole bunch of different rabbit holes we could use
Yes,
to go down.
yes.
And so we'll have to do a whole episode on that. But
Yeah.
so the other, I think, final piece that we need to maybe talk about in this first phase is the relational skills. I don't know about you, but most of us were not taught. We didn't take a class before we got married about how to have healthy conversations and how to process through conflict in a healthy way and how to have empathy for each other and to to listen in a way like we just didn't learn those. Most of us didn't learn relational skills. And so that is a big piece of this first phase too, is learning some relational skills that can help you develop empathy, that can help you learn how to process conflict when it comes up, to help you manage and recognize your emotions and how to process through them. So I think that's another big piece that we need to touch on in this first phase is that we'll help you learn some relational skills, which I think is critical, some communication skills.
Absolutely. Yes, you're correct that most of us weren't taught those things, and even if we were, then we get in and grow up in our relationship, and we grow together, and we lose skills, or they get kind of, you know, shifted a little bit. So, learning the relational skills on how to communicate properly so that so the partner can express boundaries and so that she can express her voice and her choice, but also active listening skills so that you're both able to be heard, coming together and being able to have that connection with each other. The biggest piece of that is those relational skills and the empathy piece. You mentioned that, and as I have learned about empathy and researched it, I love the beauty of empathy being able to be a learned skill. So, although people could not have ever utilized this skill, they can learn this at any age in their life. Being able to create this empathy within the relationship is really what's gonna be the catapult of towards that transformational growth in your relationship. So, teaching the one with sexual integrity issues how to have that empathy. The relational skills is huge.
Yeah. And it's empowering to think of it as a skill because if it's something that I just don't have because I wasn't born with it innately, then it's like, well, then there's no hope for me. But if you think of it as a skill, it's something you can develop. There's empowerment that comes through that. So I love thinking about it in that way of a skill that you can learn. So I'm glad you brought that up. So that kind of gives you a kind of a high level overview of the work that comes in phase one of this healing model. So let's talk a little bit about phase two, which is the working through the anger, grief, and loss of sexual betrayal and some of the pieces that come in this phase. So what do you think is important to bring up first, Stephanie?
Well, as the couple is moving into this second phase of healing, I think their skills in containing that empathy or being empathetic are growing, and which is creating a more stable and safe environment for the couple to thrive. And so safety is a piece that is built in that first phase, but it's just growing and growing into the second phase where the couple comes together in the grief and in the loss. And with grief and loss, processing that together, there's also an anger piece that comes in. Typically in the second phase is being able to navigate the losses together, and it's typically a heavy phase, but with the safety and the truth and the beginning of those trust building and relational skills, it helps in that grief stage.
And for somebody that is new to this whole journey, that term grief and loss might be a little confusing. But if you think about the, like when you have lost someone that you love, there's this process of grief that overtakes you. And the process of that, what we go through in betrayal in a relationship is very similar. There is a whole, like when you think about the different phases of grief in and of itself, you experience them in betrayal trauma as well. And so understanding that can be really helpful to make sense of some of the strong emotions that you're having because it it's kind of a little bit can be a little bit of an emotional roller coaster. You might be really sad one day and then the anger overtakes you and then you might bounce over to acceptance. You may even in the beginning be in like a bargaining phase of no, can't be true. This can't be my life, my relationship. This isn't what happens to me. It's kind of an emotional roller coaster. Understanding that this betrayal can kick you into a process of grief, I think is really helpful for you to make sense of what you experience when you're going through this.
I think to exactly what you're saying, and grief is a whole nother topic. We just have so many lined up here. I do feel like in clarifying the grief and the losses and mourning those together, the partner typically has a loss of what she knew to be true. And so she's faced with this reality of what is versus what she knew to be true. And so there is a loss that there's several losses that are involved in this. But you did also say something that is so very true is that healing and this healing journey is non-linear. And that includes the grief too. And it does sometimes feel like you are just peeing off of all the different emotions. And so the grief stages, they're nonlinear, but even these phases, you can bounce into the phase 2 grief, and then you can do some more work in the safety and the stabilization phase 1.
Mhm. Yeah, such a great point. I think the other piece that happens in this phase 2 that's important to talk about is the teaching the person with the sexual integrity issues some shame resiliency skills. And I know we start on those a little bit in phase 1, and what we've learned there, you mentioned, just keeps building in phase 2. And the reason for that is so that he can be present for her or she, depending on who the if you hear us saying he and she, just know that it's interchangeable depending on which partner has the sexual integrity issues. But for the betrayed partner, it is really there is healing is possible, I believe, without the one with sexual integrity issues to be able to be there because people that get divorced can heal all the time. But if you really want true relational healing, the one with the sexual integrity issues needs to be able to hold the partner in their pain, to be able to stand under them when the pain and the grief surfaces from what they've experienced. And so developing those skills and that shame resiliency, which requires a lot of work. That's also a skill, but it's not an easy thing to do. But that's a huge piece of this phase 2, which I think is critical. And as they do that, it sets us up to move into phase 3, which is the choosing post-traumatic growth, which is the one that we all want to get to.
Yeah. I was telling Hallie prior to this session that the post-traumatic growth is the easiest one to talk about because that's what we all want to get to that phase. That's where we're headed. Whenever you choose to seek out support and seek out healing for your relationship, this is the goal, is that growth piece. And there's so many great things that can happen in the post-traumatic growth phase, this newness of a marriage and what the basically the old has is passing away and you're rebuilding this new one. And the first piece of it is acknowledging the changes and you're able to start recognizing those benchmarks that you guys have been through together and you have progress markers. So you can acknowledge those changes that you guys have created and worked through together.
Mhm. Yeah, that can be rewarding as you look back and see all the growth that you've had. The next piece is making the choice to trust again, which can feel really scary early on. And so I hope that you'll take hope in hearing us at least talk about it, that it is possible to choose to trust again and not just true to choose to trust your spouse again, but choose to trust yourself. Maybe some people have a loss at early on at their loss of trust in God, but that trust piece is rebuilt again. And that really sets you up to see your strength as a couple and find your purpose both individually and together. And then kind of create this new vision for what you want this new version of your relationship to be like as you move forward. And oftentimes you can be maybe changing behaviors that have been around your whole life or maybe even generationally. So you're setting up this opportunity for you to leave a legacy that shows the strength that comes from adversity and working through challenges like infidelity and betrayal.
Yeah, that's great. And I just wanted to touch on the generational piece there with the sexual integrity issues. We're starting to see cycles of generational impacts of this now really exploded like in the 90s. So we're seeing these taking ownership and moving towards healing and recovery work. You have the opportunity in this post traumatic growth stage to impact generations and your children. And by changing the trajectory of how you're choosing to deal with the wounds and the heartbreak and all the things. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah.
Okay, well, we gave you a lot to think about today with this episode as we covered the 3 different phases. Please continue to join us because we're going to dig into a lot of these different topics and we're going to bring on special guests that are going to help us understand them at an even deeper level. So we hope that you'll stick around with us. And if you are looking for individual support, please check the show notes and how to get in touch with Stephanie or I. And we are so happy that you joined us and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Choosing to Stay podcast. If you have enjoyed the show, we invite you to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Connection, empathy, growth. Choosing to stay.